Hello, I'm Charles Hubbell, your host and narrator for our podcast series, Deceived, the Moo Years. Deceived, the Moo Years is the true story of one young man's compelling, at times terrifying, former involvement with the martial arts cult Chung Moo Quan.
The following story you are about to hear is true. It took place between 1980 and 1996. Most of the names have been changed. There are other versions of the story. My name is Russell Johnson, and this one is mine.
John Graden is a world champion kickboxer, an 8th degree black belt martial arts teacher who educates instructors and civilians in a law enforcement-based self-defense system called Cobra Defense. He founded National Association of Professional Martial Artists in 1994 and Martial Arts Teachers Association in 2004. John is the author of over a dozen books and was the publisher of Martial Arts Professional magazine. John Graden, welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about how you got into martial arts?
I was, like many kids in the early mid-'70s, caught up in the Kung Fu craze. About 1972-73, the number one show on TV was Kung Fu with Kwai Chang Caine. Even the number one song on the radio was everyone's Kung Fu fighting. And then the whole Bruce Lee movie thing hit, the really bad Kung Fu movies. But, you know, I was raised on John Wayne and Charles Bronson. I never saw anybody fight like that before. We were never supposed to hit somebody when he's down. And what I learned is that it's a lot easier to kick them when they're down. So it was an eye-opening experience. So I joined the local martial arts school, and I fell in love with the arts from that moment on. The very first night I took my white belt class, I knew I was going to do this for the rest of my life.
So back before you founded the National Association of Professional Martial Artists and Martial Arts Teacher Association, there seems to be little someone looking for a martial arts school could find to know which was a good school. Is that true?
Well, I would say to a degree that's still true. But what we have here in the martial arts is an unregulated and unlicensed activity. And I am all for that. I never want to see anything be regulated unless there's major safety issues or corruption issues. I'm anti-regulation, so I'm not an advocate of regulating martial arts schools. But that said, it is a big unknown. There's a lot, particularly going back a couple of decades before the explosion of media interest, before the explosion of the UFC and sport interest in the martial arts. There was a huge image of mysticism and the mystical martial arts and mystery behind it. I had kids in school say, John, is it really true you have to rip the heart out of a cow before you can earn your black belt? do you really have to register your hands? I heard that in the Marines, you have to register the hands. So, you know, I was a quiet kid who used to get picked on a lot, so I would often just nod my head, or I'd say, that sounds pretty good to me. I kind of liked the fact that they were buying into that stuff, so they would leave me alone. But the fact is that you don't have a real standard. And in fact, most schools are honest in what they advertise and what they teach to the best of their ability. No more than, I would say, yoga or dance. If you say you're looking for a Russian ballet, how do you know how to choose a Russian ballet school? Well, you watch the students, you watch the instructor, you get a sense of the atmosphere of the school, and you watch the advanced students to see if they're good. And then you say, okay, well, this is kind of what I want to do. I want to be part of this for the next couple of years. Then you enroll. So it is very much a buyer beware situation.
There seems to be some parallels between your early story and Russell Johnson's. You're a bit of a bad boy growing up. You left your martial arts schools and then returned, didn't you? So luckily, you found a school that actually cared.
I didn't return. I didn't leave. I got kicked out.
You got kicked out?
I got kicked out. Are you kidding? Leaving would be easy. Everybody quit. I got kicked out. That was really the truth. This is all, and I hate to say this is in my book, but it's true. This whole story is in the book, Who Killed Walt Bone? And it has to do with me joining a school as a kid who wanted always to be either an athlete or a teacher. That was my goal, and holy cow, martial arts presented the best opportunity to do both. You could be an athlete, and you could be a teacher. What's better than that in my mind? So I joined the school, and we're training, and I'm really going deep into this stuff. I'm actually getting up. I had to be at a school 5 miles away at 7:30 in the morning. I would get up at 5:30, go to the school and kick the bag for a couple of hours before going into school. And I tell that story because I only did that once or twice because I really stink and I've fallen asleep during classes. but the intent was I was going to train like a Bruce Lee. I was going to train like a complete beast. And I did. And after a while, I discovered something that really disturbed me a great deal and drastically affected my life. My instructors, when I joined the school, they said, one of the worst things you can put in your mouth is salt. And the next thing is sugar. Never reach for a salt shaker and never add extra sugar or try and avoid sugar as best you can. From that moment on, to this day, I never reach for salt and I try and avoid sugar. I mean, my instructor said it was the law. And then one afternoon, after about 18 months of training, and I trained really hard, I was really good, I was in the school with some of the other brown belt teenagers. They were from a different location of the same school, and I had a key to the school because my parents wouldn't pay for classes, so my instructors let me clean the school for lessons. I was the original wax-on, wax-off kid, I guess you could imagine. So every day after public school, I'd go in and clean the school. So I had a key, we trained, and when the training finished, the atmosphere in the school changed. It was like the parents left and the teens were about to take over. And out of nowhere, these guys broke out the bongs, broke out the beer, and they said, "Let's party." And I was stunned. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Mr. Bone would be really upset. In fact, I remember when he told us on our first night, never come to my class drunk, never come to my class stoned. And one of the guys was a big guy, kind of a bullyish guy. He laughed in my face and says, "John, you're so dumb." He said, "Never come to my class drunk. He comes to class stoned all the time." And it was as though someone had pulled the trigger on a trap door that was beneath me. Everything that I believed in this man about a positive, healthy lifestyle, it was pulled out from under me. And I made the decision at that moment to do what I'd done ever since my first night at that school 18 months earlier, and that was to continue to be just like my instructor. So I got swept up into a very dark, I would say at times criminal lifestyle, an underworld of sorts that was emanating around the school and around my instructor. So I don't know that much about Russell's background. I know it's a little bit different, but that is my background.
When Russell started his training, he was a teenager lacking a role model in his life, and he found Chung Moo Quan. So his instructor became that role model. So to your point, who have been your role models, and do martial arts instructors always make the best role models?
I would say there's not a classification of person that always makes the best role models, whether it's the clergy on down to the regular karate guys. There are just simply people that are better role models than others, because we're all role models one way or the other, because there are always kids kind of looking, and we're always setting an example in our lives. For me, Walt Bone and my other instructor, Hank Farah, who was very athletic, he was charming, he was funny, he had a lot of charisma. So these guys their influence wasn't completely negative by any stretch of the imagination. They had a great influence on the positive side for me, but there was a dark side, there was an undercurrent all the time. So going back to your question, I learned later there have never been, since those days, many martial artists that I have looked up to. In fact, I would say there's probably none. There are very few people that kind of get to that level. There are people that have certain qualities that I admire and certain talents, innate or learned, that I appreciate. But to model myself after someone else, I've been happy to be. There's no one living that you pull a little bit from this guy and a little bit from that guy. But I've not been very impressed with the martial arts role model in the past few decades.
Do you know, let's go to legitimate schools and how they operate. Do you know of any legitimate schools that, like Chung Moo Quan, prohibited reading martial arts magazines and contact with competing schools?
Oh, yeah. It was not. I have been to events where once I launched the it all started with me writing a book called Black Belt Management in 1993. That led to the National Association of Professional Martial Arts, et cetera. So I went from being a local instructor here to a champion to being nationally known for all that kind of stuff above. So I'd be at events, and people would come up and say, "Oh, Mr. Graden, it's nice to see you. I've read all your stuff." Man, my instructor would be so mad if he knew I was here, because they are afraid. It is a lack of confidence. It's an insecurity to allow their students to be exposed to other systems because they may be found out as being not as good or not as omniscient as they may be advertising. They may be marketing to their students.
That's interesting. In 1997, when you were the editor for you were the publisher of Martial Arts Professional Magazine, you did a series of special reports on John C. Kim and Chung Moo Quan. And the series was titled The Cult in the Quan, The Fall of a Martial Arts Magnate. When did you become aware that cults like Chung Moo Quan existed?
Very early in my, green belt, blue belt, brown belt. We had particularly in those days, because again, nobody had any idea what a real martial artist is, what a real black belt is, what a good black belt is. I was really lucky. My instructors were super good. They were nationally famous, world famous. They were literally, as I say, bad to the bone. But the vast majority of instructors didn't have that background. They weren't nearly in that category. So we had schools here locally. We had one that was called Makito 1000. It reminded me a lot of chungmukwon. Literally, the instructors would read from the manual in front of the class, look at the photos, and they would lead the class through what was being taught there. But they would emphasize what they called the spiritual side of training, because that way they could kind of mask the insanity that was being presented on the physical side, the lack of competence and depth of knowledge on the physical side. So they would use the mystical side in order to convince their students that they were the all-knowing instructors, and to please bring all your tuition here. Mm-hmm. And your sisters.
For 3 months, your magazine reported on Chung Moo Quan with extensive interviews with Russell Johnson, for instance, and others. So as the publisher of a martial arts magazine, why is it important to you to tell this story? And what lessons do you think we can take from that?
Well, to be clear, the magazine was distributed to martial arts school owners. This was not a magazine that I intended for the general public to see or get a hold of. Not that I wouldn't want to expose this to the general public. I'm quite happy to do that, but I would do it in a slightly different platform with a different slant to the message. And as someone in the media, I'm sure you understand the difference. Mm-hmm. But I wanted here's a parallel event that was going on at the time, and it was happening a lot. There were movements in the Northeast of the United States to regulate martial arts at the same time that all this was coming about. So the real question becomes, what is a black belt? What is a martial arts instructor? What qualifies someone to be either? And there frankly are no qualifications. You can go to school, you can get your MBA, come out of school, graduate college, open a martial arts school, or you can go to prison and come out of prison and open a martial arts school. Both are absolutely legal, and they happen all the time. So there is no general standard about the martial arts in terms of skill, quality, ability to teach. There, in fact, have been nothing in the way. There's been nothing in the way of education, and I don't want to point, fingers back at me and say, "Hey, I did this." But in about the same time, 1996, I created the American Council on Martial Arts specifically to address this. So I used the Chung Moo Quan articles to alert the world that there are guys like this out there. So we do need to have some standards, but the standards can't come from martial artists. They have to come from mainstream experts in the education world that are also martial artists. So they could say, okay, I have 20 years of being a sports psychologist. I'm fully trained. I'm also a black belt. Let me share with you what I know from sports psychology that is universally recognized as being a standard of teaching and communication. So this is really how you talk to a 6-year-old. This is how you talk to a 12-year-old. When you talk to teenagers, here are the speaking patterns that are best for working with them. Then you get a physiologist who's, again, a black belt, but 20, 30 years in that field. And then he says, okay, I'm going to take physiology and apply it to teaching martial arts. So that was the program that I created, and that was specifically to help instructors get the information they needed so we would have fewer chungmukwons and fewer attempts at government regulation as opposed to internal or self-policing, which I'm an advocate of.
Are you running up against fear within the martial arts community to address issues of cults? So besides your magazine, most of martial arts publications have shied away from the issue. Would that be true?
I don't know that they've shied away from it. These are not exactly investigative journalists. They are typically receiving articles from people that are proactive in getting their name out there. And if you're proactive enough, you'll get on the cover of Black Belt Magazine. But Black Belt Magazine is not going to send a reporter across the country to track down the activities of an instructor in question. Not only is it expensive for them to do because these are mom and pop magazines, but there's also a liability they just want no parts of. And the third part is that there's a certain fear, and it makes sense if you're selling advertising space to martial arts, that you don't want to create a bad name for martial arts because people might not participate, hence less eyeballs, hence less advertising dollars.
Excellent. Let's talk about martial arts and training. So there have been reports that children who practice martial arts just do better in academic circles. Can you tell us about those reports and what you draw from them?
We have a lot of evidence through various studies that is the case. I don't think it's unique to martial arts, and that's one thing I get a lot of heat for saying. Every school is different. For me in particular, going back 30 years, martial arts was the worst thing to happen to my school. I was a straight A student. I was an honor student. Once I started training, that's all I thought about. So when I was in school and this teacher was talking about biology, I was slipping a copy of Professional Karate Magazine into my book, so it looked like I was reading about, cell fission or something, and I was actually reading about Joe Louis and kickboxing. So it destroyed my school, and I told you before, I went down this really bad path. For the majority of students, however, martial arts is absolutely a fantastic activity. But here is the caveat. There is no standard of teaching. So instructors really are winging it in many ways in front of these kids, in front of these families, to try, and I think in a real altruistic way, they want to help as much as they can to teach these children good life skills. Often they'll be reading from scripts or they'll be making it up as they go. So it's not as though when you earn your black belt, you don't have to learn how to teach to get a black belt. To open a school, you don't have to have a black belt, nor do you have to know how to teach. You have to be able to purchase an occupational license and pay for the first month's rent. So again, I go back to this concept that there's no educational requisites or prerequisites to run a martial arts school. So you're going to have people that are really good at creating high-level students and changing people's lives on a much higher level of frequency than the more backyard black belts. Because you always have a spectrum. You're going to have your bottom third, your middle third, your top third. And more, though, we're seeing the collective improve because the information is getting out there more readily than it used to because of the internet and the instant information age that we're living in.
Do you think that martial arts schools are better now on the average than they were when you started training?
I would say that they are collectively better at running the operation. I would say that the odds are that the teaching is safer and more professional than it was. I wouldn't say they are better. I'm not sure that the results that they're getting are as strong as what we were getting. And that's not pointing fingers at the martial arts. That's more pointing fingers at a society that has inundated children with praise, the failed silliness of the self-esteem movement, and all the damage that has created over the past 20 years. So, when I came up through the ranks, we weren't allowed to praise the students. We were told specifically, you wait a long time before you compliment that student because they're just a scummy green belt. They're just a scummy blue belt. And that was the attitude in the school. So students, they worked really hard. And when they got a compliment, holy cow, it meant the world to them. I was at a school recently and I watched a brown belt test. And these kids, and they're average, I'd say average age 10, 11, 12. So they're old enough to be good athletes. And one kid was skip side kicking, trying to break 3 boards, which is not easy, but it's not terribly hard. It is a challenge. It's a fair challenge for the rank. He didn't do it. He bounced off the boards 5 times. And the instructor gave him a high five and told him, good job. I thought, holy cow, if that's a good job, why does he need to try any harder? That's insane. I watched an instructor with a group of children recently. He gathered them around to talk to them about a life skill. He said, excellent, 3 times just for sitting down. They came to him, sat down. Excellent. That's excellent. Way to sit down. Your words matter. Words are powerful. You're in the word business, period. As a radio host, psychologists are in the business of words. Hypnotism is nothing but words. Teaching is all about words. So to fail to recognize and appreciate and respect the power of words has, like a slow leaking tire, lowered the standards across our entire society. When you have kids dropping F-bombs just as an adjective, just as a course of conversation, you know that there is a lack of understanding about the power of language. So that is my long-winded response to our schools better now than they are then.
You are also in the business of words. And as we look further into John C. Kim and Chung Moo Quan, we can see that definitely was a business of words as he developed and maintained the school based on stories and myths and legends and with really very little repeatable, observable evidence of what he's talking about. But you are in the business of words, and you've written a book called Who Killed Walt Bone. Can you tell us and our listeners more about that book?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, it's a coming-of-age story. And I don't know if your listeners or even yourself, you've seen movies like Dazed and Confused or Almost Famous that are kind of anthem or soundtrack-based movies that are based in the mid-'70s for high school kids. That is really kind of the ambiance of the story. I call it Breaking Bad meets The Karate Kid, or The Karate Kid meets Breaking Bad. And the idea is that this is no Mr. Miyagi story. This is about a shy, awkward 13-year-old kid named John Graden who was raised in a violent family with a rageaholic father and looked for ways to escape that without really knowing it, and then saw a martial arts film called The 5 Fingers of Death, which is one of the worst films ever. But it had the exciting kicking and punching that I described earlier, and it was absolutely jaw-dropping exciting for me, and I wanted those skills. So I told my dad, I said, I want to do this. I'd like to, take karate. And I called around a bunch of schools, and one set an appointment for us to come in and watch a class. And I went into the school with my dad. My dad was always supportive of karate. He was a great dad. He just had no control of words or his temper. He had a temper that was a matchstick drenched in gasoline. But he was a loving father as long as you didn't upset him. So we went to the karate school, and there was a pole in the center of the room, which is all, when you go to many stores, there's a support pole in the center. This was wrapped in padding so nobody would get hurt. But what I saw was this 15, 16-year-old kid who was a blue belt, and he was kicking that pad, and the entire building was shaking. And I sat there and thought, oh my goodness, I want that. I want that so bad. I was just blown away by the kid. So we watched the class, and the instructor came over, and he said that it's $25 a month for a year contract. And that's all my dad needed to hear to say, well, we're out of here. So we left. And a few months later, the phone rang, and it was actually the wife of the owner of the school. And she said, I'm just calling to see if you're still interested in training. And I said, man, I'd love to, but my dad won't pay for it. I quit football, so he doesn't think I'm going to do this. She says, I think you'll be a really good student. I think you're sincere. How about if you come in and clean the school for lessons? And that was in January of 1974. My first class was February 12th of 1974. I knew I was going to do this forever, and I'm still at it. And as I described earlier, I eventually found out that my instructors were involved in drug dealing, drug smuggling, perverted sex, and even murder. And the stories in the book, Who Killed Walt Bone, are absolutely, they're exciting, they're funny, and they're downright harrowing. And this was essentially my teenage years. So it's on Amazon and soon to be on audible.com and hopefully in a theater near you. Who knows?
Excellent, excellent. When you're talking about getting a black belt, how long on average should it take for someone to reach that?
I don't like the word should. I don't think there's any should in I'm not picking on you by any stretch of the imagination, but
of course.
The martial arts, there's lots of shoulds. You know, it's like a lot of churches. There's lots of shoulds. It makes no difference to me. I had a black belt. Probably my best overall student made it in 18 months. My instructor earned his black belt in Okinawa in 3 months, quit that school, went to another one, and earned one there in 7 months. But if you ask most guys, they're going to say 3 to 4 years. Then you ask some jiu-jitsu guys, they're going to say 10 years. Time has nothing to do with it. And that's what, I have guys, particularly in certain systems, they take pride in, hey, it takes 10 years to earn a black belt in our system. I say, okay, let me understand this. I can go to West Point. I could send my child to West Point, and he could spend 4 years in one of the toughest academic military campuses, school programs in the world, and he can graduate in 4 years, and he can't get a black belt in that same period of time? You're telling me that your black belts are trained more than graduates at West Point? That makes no sense to me at all. So time has nothing to do with skill level.
And it doesn't indicate a good school, for instance.
No, a good school doesn't care about the time. A good school cares about the student, watches a student. And if you could imagine, if you could look at somebody and see their potential, just imagine you look at a class and there's this kind of chart, like a vertical chart behind them, and some have a lower potential, some have a higher potential. Your job is to push them up that chart to reach that potential, whether it happens in 3, 4 months, 18 months, 4 years, 10 years, it makes no difference. As long as they're working towards their potential. That's the goal of a good instructor, not to play silly time games.
So you and your dad walked into this first martial arts school and they said $25 a month, and that sounds like a really good deal, actually, compared to the reports of students of Chung Moo Quan paying up to $50,000 and more for their lessons. What do you think when you hear these kinds of numbers, paying this exorbitant amount of money? Is there an average that a person should accept for paying for lessons?
No. And like time, the money is not the issue. There's nothing wrong with an instructor asking for any tuition amount. It's entirely up to the family to make that decision.
Excellent.
You cannot defer that off to that guy. If he's asking for, I always wanted to be the most expensive school in town, and I was. But here's the flip side, and this is really important to understand. And I'm no means advocating Chung Moo Quan and the cults and all that. If I take a good black belt and I say to him or her, all right, I will cut you a check right now. Here's the deal. You never took martial arts. Never entered your life. You didn't go through the classes. You didn't get the benefits. You never earned your black belt. I'm going to erase that from your life. I will cut you a check right now for $50,000. Will you do it? I ask that question all the time in seminars, and no one raises their hand. Will you do it for $100,000? No. So, like time, money is just a measurement. It doesn't indicate quality. It doesn't indicate anything. It indicates someone asking and someone foolishly enough accepting, or rightfully enough accepting. So that's not really a measurement of quality.
There are different titles that teachers will take on in the martial arts. How do you feel about different titles like Grandmaster or Sifu, or John C. Kim, I believe, called himself the Supreme Arbiter?
That's my title.
Oh, shoot.
Dang it. I don't know if you remember, and I suspect that you're not, I don't know how old you are, but either way, you might recall the Seinfeld show.
Oh, yes.
And there was an episode in the Seinfeld show that absolutely illustrates the silliness of titles. Elaine was dating a guy who was an orchestra leader, and he insisted everyone call him Maestro. And he would get so mad if someone insulted. He was indignant if someone didn't call him Maestro. because the great Leonard Bernstein was being called maestro, and he wanted to be just like Leonard Bernstein. And maestro, of course, means master. So that's the kind of fun answer. Here's the reality of it. For guys like me, guys like Russell, and I don't know Russell that well, I'm making a leap of confidence here because I've had this conversation many times with many great black belts. The reason the martial arts appeals to us so much when we're young is because we're coming out of a violent, intimidating situation that often makes us feel powerless. And we're never in control. And we're being either physically or verbally or psychologically abused. And then we get to the martial arts school, and there's a direct path to respect. I took beatings in the karate school that were far worse than my father ever gave me, but they were for a reason. I was getting closer to the inner circle. And as I moved up the rank and my belt got darker, I started being more competent in the martial arts. And I could take those beatings without crying or running for the door. And as I got to be brown belt, when I went from being John, or Dumb John, as I was called by some, to being Mr. Graden. Holy cow, these people are bowing to me. They're calling me Mr. Graden. That's addictive to some people. And it doesn't stop there. They'll go right from Mr. Graden to Master Graden, to Grandmaster Graden, to Great Grandmaster Graden, to Supreme Grandmaster Graden. It's indicative of a dysfunction that the martial arts is really good at helping people with. But whenever you're in a scenario where that dysfunction is kind of a driving force behind people committing themselves so much to the arts, you're going to have abuses. And a great example of this is before we were as organized, and I had the quote fingers up as I say organized, as we are today. We used to have tournaments, and the black belts would meet before the tournament, and they would have a rules meeting. Now, you've got about 30 different control freaks that are all called Master, Supreme Master, Shihan, Sensei, all trying to get their own way in a room full of other people just like them. So obviously it was exercise in frustration. So I am not an advocate in the slightest of the silliness of these titles. And it's another reason, another thing that gets me in a lot of trouble with these guys, but I have truth Tourette's. I can't help but tell the truth. And it gets me in trouble. I'm just going to leave it at that. That's really the essence of the issue with these titles.
So some of it is about claiming or creating even a legend about yourself. When it comes to John C. Kim, he continues to claim that he is the undefeated champion of all Asia. He was said to have retired the championship because no one had dared to challenge him. So martial arts masters from Korea say that there is no such competition for all of Asia. So in all your years of competing, have you ever heard of any kind of competition like this where you could make that claim?
He could absolutely be telling the truth.
Okay.
It's highly plausible. If he, in his school, hosted the All Asia Championships, and he pounded his students, and he dared them to come challenge him, and none did, he's accurate. This is not the Olympics. This is not the NFL. I can have the World Championships in my backyard tomorrow, and guys do that. I had an interview. Remember Tybo back in the 90s?
Oh, yes.
Billy Blanks? Great guy, super fighter. I interviewed him, and I said, wow, you've got 7 different world titles. And he goes, John, I can't help it what these guys call their tournaments. I just won it. And that was so spot on. The biggest heroes in the world of kickboxing and martial arts are Joe Louis, Bill Wallace, and Jeff Smith. They won their world titles after fighting one guy at a tournament in Los Angeles. To this day, they are considered the first world champions in middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. They are legends to this day. But the entire event was a setup. Doesn't mean that they didn't earn it. Doesn't mean that they weren't qualified. They certainly are, and they're great guys, and they're all friends of mine. But another really good friend of mine was the promoter of the event. And after the event, which was on ABC, 90-minute special, biggest special of the year for ABC, he went into ABC And he said, wow, that was really great. When can we do it again? And they said, we're not going to do it again. And his jaw dropped. He goes, what do you mean? We sold out. We had the highest ratings. He goes, Mike, this is not a real sport. You handpicked every fighter. You don't have a grassroots. You don't have kids in Pop Warner in their backyards dreaming about becoming the first full contact karate fighter. You picked 20 guys, you put them in a ring, and the guys you figured are going to win won. That's not a real sport. We can't do it again. So for him to make the claims that he's making, that's no different than any guy advertising championships in any, I guess we used to say Yellow Pages, but any website.
That is amazing. I'm turning the other guys in the room, and we're all smiling. It's amazing.
Poor Russell's going, why did I book this guy?
This is fantastic. We're all loving this. Okay. Okay, here's another one. Here's another claim thing. So Chung Moo Quan claimed to be too deadly a style to compete in martial arts competitions. Do you feel if they had competed that it would have exposed them as a fraud? I mean, you're talking about setting up competitions and that maybe it's a setup, but if you have to actually show your style and you claim that you're too deadly to compete, wouldn't that expose someone?
Making the claim is not a... I'm sorry, I just got a text one.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It threw me off. Okay, so recap the question again real quick.
So they made the claim, he makes the claim that his style is too deadly to compete in a martial art competition. Mm-hmm. But don't you think that if they had competed, that it would have exposed them?
You don't know. I don't think anybody's too deadly to compete, but that's his claim. You accept it or you don't. It's very hard to validate it. How are you going to do that? Are you going to force him to get in the ring and fight? You can't do that. Mm-hmm. That's just his claim. So again, we are not in a situation where we can go, here's a good example, where we can go to Columbia University and find out the president's records. We don't have that privilege in the martial arts.
So you can't test. You can't. Yeah, it's interesting to think about. So, and you are totally blowing away my preconception. So this is marvelous.
Yeah, you can't say that he was right or he was wrong. You can say, I think he's full of BS, and I think that he's hyping himself. Who hasn't done that before?
Yeah.
He overdid it. Here's my suspicion, and I'm not going to say that I've seen this more so with Koreans and others, but I have. Is that he was a megalomaniac. I have dealt with a lot of these guys, and including the Reverend Moons. Some young Moon, I think, remember the Moonies?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, yes.
They flew me first class to D.C. for a big event they wanted me to speak at, and this was in the late 90s or something. I don't know when it was. I had no idea who the guy was, and I get there, and it was that guy. It was that Reverend Moon, that Mooney guy. Mm-hmm. And he flew people in from around the world. There had to be 500-600 people there, all first class, nice facilities. When it was an NFL player and myself doing a presentation in a room, and there were 9 different translators. I mean, this is the biggest gig I've ever spoken at. Not in terms of number of people there, but in terms of the investment in the whole thing. And there were reporters from all over the place. So when you said something, the translates would go around. So you tell a joke, it would take a while to make the lap through all 9 different. The Italians always seemed a little bit, they didn't get it, but and I love Italians. But the reality was that this guy had a private audience with myself, Stephen Hayes, the ninja guy, and some other leaders in the arts at the time. And I remember him. He put us in the 2 lines. They put us in the 2 lines. There was a red carpet going down the middle of the room, and there were 4 of us on each side, kind of standing at attention, waiting, wondering what the heck's going on. So, in the red carpet led up 2 stairs to a platform with 2 golden thrones. I kid you not. And then the appointed moment arrives, and in comes Reverend Moon. He doesn't have his wife with him at this point. And he walks down the line. He shakes hands. He kind of punches me in the stomach. And then he looks at Stephen Hayes. And Russell will know Stephen Hayes' name. He is the foremost American ninjutsu practitioner, teacher, master. He's a great guy, and he's the real deal. And he said to him, if you follow me, you must shave your beard. And I said, oh, did I just hear what I thought I just heard? Holy cow. And the guy went on to talk about how he wanted to use the martial arts as I took it to take over the world, because he knew that there were martial arts followers in every community around the world. And if he could influence the martial arts followers, he could influence the world. And I know at least one guy, minimum one guy, but probably more, that I knew before that event as a martial arts school owner somewhere in the Southeast that used to email me. And then the next time after the event I heard from him, he was in South America at a Mooney camp. He'd been recruited. He was in. They got him.
It's remarkable that you're bringing this up. The last interview we just had was with Steve Hassan, who was a former Mooney. He was a leader. He was a teacher in that movement. And there is suggestions and documentation to show that there is some connection between the Reverend, which he doesn't like to use that word, Moon, and John C. Kim. That there is an intentional, an intentional Korean motivation to infiltrate America and their own country, really, with this sort of mind control tactic.
There was, I don't know if it's so prevalent now, but there were other leading Korean instructors, masters that will remain nameless, that I know were involved as well. I think in many cases they were initially innocent in that this guy was highly funded. He had a tremendous platform. He had lots of influence. So I can see that if I'm in a different country and this guy is established, extremely wealthy, he owns his own newspaper. They took us on a tour of the Washington Times newspaper. That's his newspaper.
Oh, yes.
So I could see it would be natural to be attracted to the potential that working with this guy might have. Some of them went off the deep end. Some of them saw the signs and then backed off. And again, I'll leave them to be anonymous. But I was in the thick of all that at the time. And I'll tell you what was really super interesting to me, going back to the translation. That night, he had a big conference, and we were all in there, 600 people or so, and we all had headphones on because he was speaking in Korean, and all the translator, and he had the ballet come out, and these people performed. But then he went out and started talking, and I know now what he was doing because I've been trained in a lot of NLP and hypnosis, and I understand that much more clearly now. He went on for 3 hours. He talked about the strangest things imaginable, and now I understand the power of what he was doing. And again, it was all words. He talked about how it's repugnant for you to touch the feces of another person, but if it gets on your hand, it's not as bad. The boogers from another person are not as bad, but if they're yours, it was really creating these kind of strange spectrums of acceptability and not acceptability, and then using that as a pathway. So if this is unacceptable for other people but acceptable for you, then it's your job to kind of reach out to where you can maybe do things that aren't comfortable for the greater good. I mean, I now know the patterns he was using. It was mass hypnosis, which is what cult leaders do.
That's remarkable. And I can see how you being brought in first class, and you just said yourself you really didn't really know what was going on, but you're then thrust into this amazing arena of a ton of money. There's gold thrones. There's this access to this high-powered person. You may have, if your critical thinking skills weren't as sharp as they are, you may have decided to go a different path after that day.
I remember getting there, literally walking across the park by the Smithsonian Institute, and we were to meet someplace to get on buses and things. And some guy from Britain, John Graden, what the hell are you doing here? I'll never forget. I didn't know the guy from Adam, but he knew me from England. And it was just that thing, because martial arts is not an activity that you see a lot of wealthy people do. It is attractive to the downtrodden because it gives you power. It gives you a way to take control of your life. That is me, perfect. In cults, target that exact demographic. The people that really are in need of something to belong to that is bigger than what they can do. And with the right words and the right atmosphere building around those words, surrounding those words, it can be highly influential, very powerful.
John, if people are interested in your books, where are they all available?
If you are interested in my books, johngraden.com, just like it sounds, JOHNGRADEN. If you're a martial arts school owner, instructor, or want to check that kind of stuff out, check out martialartsteachers.com, just like it sounds.
That's remarkable. Thank you for an amazing interview, and thank you for your valuable time, John. It was great to speak with you today.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
Deceived, the Moo Years is a production of Deja Moo, LLC. Recorded and produced by Alive and Social Podcast Network. Russell Johnson, producer and writer. Charles Hubbell, host and narrator. David Bruskin, editor. Russ Meyer, co-writer and editor. Aaron Troe, sound producer. Brian Price, audio editor. Wyatt Sarber, recording engineer and editor. Woon Tae Ryu is our advisor in South Korea. Authentic is our advertising representative. Deceived, the Moo Years is represented by Young Entertainment Law.